So our guest today is Robert Bortins, a friend of the show. This is your second time coming on, I believe, Mr. Bortins. I want to thank you for that. But you're a homeschooling expert. You're a homeschooling dad. You navigate both the practical aspects of homeschooling. You guys have a well-developed, mature curriculum that is also expanding. But yet you guys are expanding because just like the homeschooling founder, R.J. Rushdoony, the founder of homeschooling in America, the founder of Christian education, became over time a legal expert. He was called on to testify in cases like what we saw in the 80s in Texas, the Leaper case, which is like the only court transcript I've ever stayed up all night reading like it was an action novel as I watched him whip the attorneys that the state of Texas sent. But you're kind of migrating into a role like that. You're becoming an expert on homeschooling in the various structures in various states. So instead of simply introducing you as the CEO of Classical Conversations, I'm going to introduce you as a man who is an expert on homeschooling in a tremendous number of jurisdictions, not just statewide in the United States, but internationally at this point. So welcome to the show, Robert Bortins.
Hey, I'm glad to be back and continuing to fight for educational freedom and independence. And that's kind of the last stand, I believe, here in the United States, because I've seen what happens overseas when we give up that independence for government handouts.
Yeah. And just so everybody knows what I'm talking about, this is a series of tweets that you've been making on the loss of independence in homeschooling. And it's been a combination of tweets that are international in focus. You recently tweeted on what was happening in Sweden with their homeschooling, which I think everybody's like, what in the world does Sweden have to do with the United States? But we've also seen things happening in the state of Mississippi since they, have been working on school choice. We've seen statements from government officials in Oklahoma, Texas. But let's start with Sweden. What is going on in Sweden that made you predominantly deal in the United States in your educational efforts? But what made you comment on Sweden recently?
Yeah, so when I first came on board with Classical Conversations in 2012, we actually went to our very first and the first ever global home education conference. And the idea behind it was held in Germany. It's one of a handful of quote unquote Western countries where home education is illegal. And in Germany, they have very generous tax breaks and school choice options there.
So they have school choice in Germany, just not homeschooling.
Correct. But if your church wants to start a school, the government will help subsidize that school and those things. I don't know how much curriculum independence they have, but the 4 walls that you want to do school in, you do get a choice on which 4 walls you want to send your kids to. And so that's what happened. I have a friend, Alex Newman. He has a show as well, and he was homeschooled his kids, and he was actually in Sweden in the early 90s and came back to the U.S. When he saw what was happening. But he was in Sweden in 1992, a conservative, pro-freedom platform government was elected, and they passed the sweeping school choice bill. And basically, it was going to be, I think, 80% of whatever municipality was spending on their students. Sound familiar? They would have to provide in funding to the students if they wanted to go to, a church school or, some other educational option in K through 12. And so that's how it started. And of course, it was celebrated by, the think tanks pushing school choice. But just a few years later, the socialist government was put in place. Imagine that, a country where sometimes one group gets elected and other times another group elected. We don't ever experience that here in North America and the United States. And they started putting, hey, we're giving you, $8,000 or whatever the number is a year to educate your kids, but we don't know how the money's being spent. Are these kids getting a good education? So they just slowly begin adding, different requirements. And then they invested in a national curriculum. Believe it or not, Texas has a Texas curriculum that they're considering right now as we speak, or as we're recording it. So a national curriculum, and the schools were highly encouraged to adopt it, but not required. And then eventually they said, well, everyone needs to be, in the name of equality, we want to make sure everyone is having an equal opportunity at success and everyone's getting the same thing. Every single institution has to teach the national curriculum. And at the same time, there's no reason for anyone to homeschool because, and this was happened just 19 years later. So 1992 was the first bill. 2011, they outlawed homeschooling because since we're paying everyone's education anyways, there's no reason that a parent would need to do it at home because we're funding it. And basically, every single school in Sweden is accredited. And if you don't teach the curriculum how they want it to be taught, that you would lose your accreditation. And they've also, outlawed private payment for education too in that country, which, obviously could not be done probably here. But the main point is that even good Christian teachers at good Christian churches are forced to teach LGBT secularization to the kids, climate change, ESG, whatever 3 or 4 or 5 letter acronym that the United Nations is pushing, they have to teach in their schools. And so they have to, and it only took 19 years for it to happen.
Wow.
So basically in one generation.
That is truly amazing. And there are so many issues that we face in the United States, whether it's education, whether it is firearms freedom, whether it's free speech issues in general, even things just as basic as freedom of association. The people cannot picture them going in a way that you and I can look at it, and we can just do thought experiments in our head, and we can see possible trajectories and the way things are going, and just understand that what's coming up isn't good. I remember there's a constitutional amendment on the ballot in Minnesota right now, Robert, that would prohibit churches and religious schools from exercising, from basically using their statements of faith when they make hiring decisions. So they wouldn't be able to exclude somebody, who is lesbian or a sodomite from teaching in their Christian school. And I remember when George Takei came through with the Soul Train back, I think it was around 2006. They went on that 40 school journey for LGBT rights. And I remember Gordon Anderson, who was the president of North Central University, talking about that at that time. And he said, what is really at stake is freedom of association. But that school hadn't fought for freedom of association, even the way that schools like Grove City College had. So people need to look down the line. There are little dots that are lining up, and people, all you have to do is draw a line through them and gauge the speed at which things are going, and you'll know where that's going to fall. So thank you for the story of Sweden, but we're already seeing things like what we've seen in Sweden happen in the United States. Tell us about Mississippi, for example, and their superintendent of schools.
Yeah, so Mississippi, you think that as a conservative state, has made it very clear that, with the shekels come the shackles, that there must be accountability for these tax dollars to be spent. And, quite frankly, I agree with them. As a conservative and as a Christian, the Bible's full of, hey, if you have talents, reporting back, how are they used? Were you able to multiply them? Were you able to use them well? So we should expect and, in fact, demand accountability in these school choice measures. But unfortunately, God did not give the state the authority of education. And so it's hard to be accountable to an entity that has no godly authority in this realm. And so it just perverts the entire system. And you get negative outcomes like you've seen in Sweden, where they used to be, very high up in the educational rankings and have dropped considerably since school choice was adopted. So in the end, people will say, well, I don't have to take this money. or, hey, maybe that will help out that person, but I'm not going to do that. Well, what we've seen, like in the state of Florida, our groups typically will use churches to meet in. Well, the churches have said, well, you've got all this money from the state now, so instead of charging you, $100 to cover the light bill and the water bill, we're going to charge you $10,000 so we can get some of this money into our coffers, because you're getting all this money. It's not fair for you to keep it. And then even if we explain to them that, no, we're not taking this money because we think it's, contrary to what the Bible tells us about who's responsible for paying for education. Well, if that's really what their mind's about, they'll be able to go get some other organization who isn't being able to, stand on principles or have different principles than we do. So it always, even if you don't take the money, inflation's going to hit you. And, people would say, wasn't this just a slippery slope? Well, what happened in Sweden won't necessarily happen here. And yeah, to some extent, you could say it's a slippery slope. But if I've seen the last 10 people walk on this hill fall down,
right,
it's no longer a slippery slope fallacy. Yeah. And so this isn't a new concept. This is the demand side economics. We're going to put money into the market to stimulate demand. And that's what we saw during COVID. And of course, you saw, 10%, 11% inflation on, some things, even higher on others. We've seen this in K through 12 with government subsidized student loans, where there's money that's thrown into the system and prices go up and the benefits go down. We see this in our healthcare system. There's some neat graphics I've seen on the internet where it has like all of these different things that are going, all these different outcomes, like TVs down, prices down, all these things that aren't subsidized, quality's improving, prices decreasing. And all the things that get subsidized by the government, all of those things are, going up in cost and going down in value. And so this isn't a slippery slope or something that's never been tried before. It's been tried multiple times in multiple areas with the same result every single time.
Well, I hate the term slippery slope because I view it as one of the greatest coups in education, that every freshman psychology course and every freshman philosophy course across the United States teaches people that the slippery slope is a logical fallacy. But the way they teach it is that you cannot, as an individual, make an it's removing permission for individuals to observe cause and effect, and it's really a precursor to joining the cult of the expert. If you're not an expert, if you don't have a large enough data set, you're not qualified to make these decisions. But when we look at education, let's just rant over about the slippery slope. This is not a slope we're talking about going down. This is a series of well-plotted graph points from which we're drawing a vector. We've seen this go. You exit this ramp at this speed, at this angle, you hit all these points along the way, your velocity continues to increase. We know where you're going to land. We know the mass. And so we've talked about Sweden. We've talked about Mississippi, but surely this isn't happening in Texas. I mean, is the same thing happening in Texas?
Well, Texas is working on passing a school choice bill this upcoming session. They tried to pass it last time and it didn't get through. The people who want school choice, I don't know the exact amount, but I was hearing tens of millions of dollars into specific races. I don't know if they topped $100 million in primaries being spent, but somewhere well above 10 million and probably below 100 million to get their people in. And of course, you got to think who's going to benefit if I'm going to spend $100 million there. So, someone's benefiting on the backside. And of course, anybody who knows anything about welfare programs, they're just really pass-throughs to other entities. So it's like Class Wallet or Stand to make billions of dollars while the money gets passed through other people's hands and in groups like that. Arizona, which has been the gold standard for universal school choice because it has no strings attached to it upon being passed, just like this Tennessee bill, added educational funding to public schools. So if you're going to say, hey, we want to make it so kids can leave the system, but now you're adding funds to the system. How does that work out? Because now the places that you're leaving to have a higher threshold of competition. As far as at least money is being concerned, Arizona's blown their budget up. Like they don't know how that they're going to continue to pay for these without, running tax increases.
And when you say blown up, you don't mean just like overspent. You mean like doubled.
Yeah, I mean they've tried to spin it in a good way. This is so popular that instead of spending $600 million on this, we spent $1.2 billion on it. I mean that'd be like the federal government saying, "Hey, our policies are so good. Instead of having a balanced budget, we had $2 trillion a year to our deficit." That's how popular our programs are. And so, they try to spin it that way, but ultimately it has to go, someone has to pay for it. Right. And so it's either going to be, in taxes to you and your family or taxes to your neighbors. And, that's the bottom line is you're going to have conservatives and Republicans running on raising taxes so that they can keep the school choice dollars flowing. And in the meantime, that private school down the street that costs $10,000 a year over a series of price increases over 4 or 5 years is now $18,000 because they know that the 100 seats they have in their auditorium, that they've got more demand by it. And they know that the parents can already pay $10,000 out of their own pockets. So they just raise it to $18,000. And so that's ultimately why Sweden made it so that you couldn't charge fees above and beyond what they're subsidizing, because that's what the natural thing is for any sort of organization. If the government's going to give out free money, go ahead and take it, line your own pockets, add in some programs, pay better, do whatever you want to do with it. Because your customers aren't paying for it. The government's seizing it from your neighbors with force.
And I want everybody to hear what you're saying very specifically here, that the politicians are going to be voting for tax increases. The politicians are going to be funding unlimited mandates that have no budgetary constraints to them. They're not going to be able to repeal these things year over year. You're not going to be able to cut them back or reduce them because that's in the code right now. I want everybody to understand what part of that is conservative.
None of it. I mean,
But Robert, we're a red state. Everybody keeps telling me this is such a red state. Hang on a second. That can't be true.
Well, so the politicians, of course, speak out of both sides of their mouths. So, one of the things is they're talking about, raising teacher pay. And so, I mean, no one can oppose raising teacher pay. And part of the reason that they want to do that is a lot of these rural areas rely on the public school system for, financing for a significant portion of the jobs in their county. And so they're hoping to kind of bribe those politicians to vote for this, knowing that they can, basically it gives them a shield that they could say, I voted for the school choice thing, but I also voted for, our, 10 administrators and our 100 school teachers all to get raises. And so you all will be set. But the other point was of the whole thing was I thought was to get kids out of the public schools because they couldn't afford it. But then so they're doing two things that are counter to each other, and
that's right.
And it's almost impossible. Nothing's more permanent than a temporary, temporary government program. I mean, you could argue possibly that, hey, we need to help, we need to help poor kids get out, right? That's all I said. Well, what about the poor kids? Well, the bill's not written for that. And they're written for universal, which means, a billionaire in your state who has 5 kids, and if you're getting $8,000 per kid, you can get $40,000 a year in tax.
That's right.
And what we're seeing here in North Carolina, so they passed school choice, just for homeschoolers. Thankfully, were left out, but they passed it for the private schools. Well, any of the private schools in our state that are good and considered reputable have said, we're not taking this money because inevitably it's going to erode our program. And since the only people really taking the money is private schools that were underperforming to begin with. And They're of course creating, business plans and things that are not built on, individuals saying, hey, this is worth my time, effort, and energy and money to supplement. They're building business plans based on the government, forcefully taking our money every single year.
And what people don't understand.
So
go ahead, man.
It's so difficult to segregate those funds, though, Robert. I know schools in Florida, that said they were not going to take the money. Then halfway through the school year, they find out that we took the money, because money's fungible and it has ways of depending on who's writing the check. So I also know of schools that I've talked to in Florida where Florida is dealing right now with the problem of they're a majority Christian state and they're funding Muslim schools. And there are some of these schools in Florida that have brought in radical clerics, and that's made its way back to their legislature, and they don't like it. So now they're going to start regulating some of these things. They're seeking to figure out how to regulate it because, let's be frank, they don't want radical Muslims. They might not mind if Doug Wilson comes down and speaks. I sure would love Doug Wilson to come speak to my children, but they don't want a guy that coached the 9/11 guys right before they went out to come in and speak, or would have coached the 9/11 guys right before they went in to fly. So a lot of these schools are there. How do you handle you can't stop where the money comes from. It's not concierge medicine.
That's the thing in Texas. So in Texas, they have an LGBTQ school where they basically, I don't know how many students are enrolled. I was watching on Twitter, but say they have 200 students enrolled.
They identify as 607 students.
Yeah,
it's 200.
I don't know how many, but I'm just saying that. Just imagine that scenario, and right now, as disgusting as that is to me, at least it's being paid for by their parents out of their parents'
pocket,
right?
Right.
Texas, which is a red state, is going to be subsidizing to the tunes of tens of millions of dollars LGBT education for K through 12 if this passes. Tennessee, right? So you're going to have, imagine this. You are Bill Gates, and you have billions of dollars, and you want to make sure you have a lasting legacy. Oh, look, all of these red states are doling out tens of millions of dollars. Let me start the Bill Gates schools. And now we're funding Bill Gates. Or, like communist China bought IMG Academy in Florida right after this bill was passed. Then the Florida legislators, stepped in to stop the sale. So right there, stopping the free market. And there's plenty of reasons that, communist China probably shouldn't own schools in the United States. But it's not like they're not smart.
Bigotry, Robert. That's bigotry.
There's plenty of ways for them to work around it, right? They just donate money to someone else who does that. And so the people like me who aren't willing to take the money, may have a different set of moral values than the people who are willing to take the money. And so you're going to have basically all these educational institutions run by people who have the moral values that say, yes, I support the government confiscating your wealth in order to pay my bills. And even if they're doing a great job, that right there should disturb you as a Christian, because God did not give the state any sort of jurisdiction over the family or education. The state's pretty much responsibility is justice and protection, armies and those type of things. So anything outside of that jurisdiction, God's not going to honor. And if we want to say we're for small government, that's the other thing that really gets me. It's like, okay, if you're for a smaller state government, how is expanding it by $600 million or $1 billion a year, adding a new department to manage this, or expanding a current department to manage this? There's nothing small about it. And, I'm sympathetic, like, okay, well, we want to get our kids out of these, poorly run schools or these failing schools, or give people different opportunities. It's like, well, the reason that these schools are running poorly is because they all have to check off a bunch of government boxes. And guess who has direct control over what boxes they have to check off? The legislators. right? So the Department of Education in each state, I'm excited that Trump's talking about ending the Department of Education at a federal level. But just like Roe v. Wade was overturned at a federal level, that just means the fight goes to 50 states, and we've got to get the Department of Education out of all 50 states and, return and control more and more locally to, school boards and to families, and not have it run out of your bureaucratic swamp.
And I want to roll into that, and I want Sean to take this over. But like my fear with the Department of Education going away is twofold. Sean's going to talk about one point about the funding, but like people are going to look to groups like there are a lot of states that are just going to, instead of there being a federal Department of Education between, for example, the state of California and the United Nations, there's just going to be a direct link to UN, schooling efforts. So, and Sean has another point he wants to bring up.
Well, Robert, I talked to some legislators this weekend, and you should have seen their eyes get as big as $50 when you said, "Do you really want the Department of Education to go away?" And then that chairman of that committee right there, he sits on the education, committee, and he's going to be the most powerful man in your legislature come next session, because he's going to have $3 billion in his budget. Is that what you really want to have happen? No, of course not. But at the same time, I don't know that anybody has put together, like in Tennessee, we had a great trigger bill for abortion. And when the federal abortion ban was ended, it regressed to the state, and therefore our law kicked in, and we banned abortion through our trigger law. But I don't know if anybody's done anything else like that in education. And I don't even know where to start getting our hands on that money before it evaporates. It's going to come through in a tidal wave, and all of it's just going to go into every nook and cranny. And I fear we're going to lose a lot of it in the way it's funded, where you can never cut it back, and those kind of restrictions that they place on it. I don't know a good way. Would a trigger bill maybe help us with something like this?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think, I think a couple things is, what does it mean to end the Department of Education? Because there's definitely some of the things that they're doing is going to be just moved to other departments. So some of it's just getting led of bureaucrats. There's of course going to be some sort of plan to, I guess, have to unwind it, right? You can't just go in on a Monday and not have it on a Tuesday. So I think, there's going to be some things like block grants and stuff where they just give them the money. I mean, that's just, like it or not like it, how it's going to be. And then, ultimately, the federal government definitely doesn't have any sort of responsibility. So it would go to the state, and it would make the state bureaucracy definitely more powerful. Mm-hmm. But the nice thing is, if you don't like your state, it's a lot easier to move to another state than it is to, move to another country. So
we're going to make it so easy to move to other countries. There's a wonderful bureaucracy in place for that, Robert. I do not know what you're talking about.
So yeah, you're going to get states like California that might just adopt, whatever UNESCO is doing. But hey, guess what? Guess who else is adopting whatever UNESCO is pushing right now? Everybody pushing school choice. So,
that's right. Same agenda.
So it's not. Yeah. So I don't know. I mean, you go from this one enemy, and of course, if you have someone competent at the Department of Education, right, you could use it to do something good. You also get incompetent people can use it to do something bad. So I mean, ultimately, I think you want to get rid of it from the federal government, but then the rights go back to the state, and you really want to get the state out of it, and then have it be at a county by county level would be preferable. And so obviously for me, the preference is 100% parent funded 100% of the time, wherever it's at. But you also have to see what's the goal and how do you get there? And that's another, right. I'm an abolitionist when it comes to abortion, but I'm also very much understanding that if I can go to an island on a rowboat and save 10 kids, I'm going to do that, even though I want to save all 100. Right. And so I'm very pragmatic in the sense of, this isn't a bill that, I still think, murder still happens here, but less of it. School choice is not one where I'm thinking this is going to help more people not develop a socialist mindset. or get out of the because they always say get out of the Marxist schools. I was like, well, what's Marxism but the redistribution of wealth?
That's
and
right.
What is school choice? The redistribution of wealth. So you can't, a house divided against itself cannot stand.
Yeah.
And so you can have, the Marxists, BLM, LGBT, CRT, taught in public schools. But guess what? Those are still, those ideas are still being taught in private schools.
That's right. And I think the content is so, that's one of the reasons why we use, classical conversations, is the content teaches you to think about these things rationally. I almost feel like, Robert, we're having two different conversations here. We're having a conversation with people who still believe that the government education provisions are good and beneficial. And you and I don't. We've taken our kids out. We'll not put them back in. And we don't believe that benefit is there. Whereas our legislators on the other side, I do believe that they still think they don't see that 30% of the kids can read. They don't see that 80% of the kids are not coming out proficient by the time they graduate. They just don't believe that. You and I have a different view of the education system, and it changes how we look at all of it from there, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it has to go back to your worldview. And I would just say, like, when I talk to legislators, a lot of them are sympathetic and don't necessarily disagree, but they know that that's not where the, Overton window hasn't moved that far our direction yet to have those conversations publicly. And so, if you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And so as legislators, they don't necessarily, they want to do something. And this is the something they can do. And maybe it has some short-term benefit, but the long-term benefit is negative. And of course, they run on 2-year terms and things like that. So, that's really the danger from an independence thing on our side is, we want to be independent. That, pre-COVID, 10% of people were already paying their own bills for education. And then afterwards, it spiked up to like 15% for a time. We're moving in the right direction. But if we have everyone subsidized by the government, then, it'll be Sean, your family and ours, and a handful of others that are, underground independent educators and everything.
Rebels.
Textbook costs $500 because it's being subsidized. Yeah, people don't understand, like, the textbook that you pay $200 or $300 for in college, like those textbooks for K through 12, half that cost. Why?
Right.
Because people know that they're having to pay for it out of their own pocket. It's not getting subsidized by these student loans. And so, the manufacturers or publishers like us, we have to figure out how to publish it and make it for less. But hey, if the government's going to give you a loan to buy my book, I should charge you as much as the market will bear.
Well, let me ask you a question, Robert. Okay, and I'll preface this with, we talk to people in Florida who take the state money that the state of Florida offers to them, and their children have to be interviewed. They do a home inspection, essentially. And to me, that's less freedom. To me, that's but we've all sort of agreed that when the government gives money to people, it is a conservative position to say, well, you need some accountability for how that money's used. So I get that. But when you look at all of the states that have passed so-called school choice, which I'm so angry Sean refuses to call it so-called school choice every time. I've been telling him for 6 months that's our biggest marketing thing. So-called school choice, Robert, what states that have embraced this model have a freer, less encumbered homeschooling environment now?
Well, a couple things. One is, I think homeschooling in general, we've got a pretty big group that will show up on legislators' doors and make sure that they don't pass bad things. Even in the state of California, where you can't really, they've got a supermajority. The Democrats have a supermajority everywhere, and in general, they're the type that like to put legislation on us. They've had quite a difficult time because homeschoolers will just show up en masse and say, leave us alone. But they do. California has a form of school choice with vouchers, and those people they do require things from, because they're not homeschoolers, right? They're just educating, in the four walls of their home, being subsidized by the government. And they do tell things. But right now we have the higher moral ground. We do not take your money, therefore you have no right to legislate us. You should not add strings to us because we have done nothing to ask, for those strings. But as soon as you start taking the money, then you've said, yes, you have a business in my home, that you have a legitimate claim to what I'm doing because you are now funding it. And so, with like Mississippi, even in Oklahoma, of course, as a Democrat that, published the bill. And of course, it's not going to get anywhere right now in Oklahoma. But, I'm old enough to remember when Colorado was a solid red state, and you could have probably passed all sorts of great things and not expect anything to happen. And now look at it. Kentucky, when they put school choice in front of the voters in Kentucky, a red state, they voted it down, I think, like 60% to 40%. And why was that? Because they seek their independence. School choice is not as popular as to politicians as they want to think it is, or as groups like Americans for Prosperity and Corey Dean and those type of people like to say it is with the voters. So, in fact, I saw one poll that showed Democrat voters who vote Democrat have a higher positive opinion of school choice than conservative voters. So it's actually, when you poll the people who have kids and how they vote, it's more popular among Democrat parents than it is for conservative parents. And so
is this an attempt to build more of a big tent neoconservatism? Then are they looking to bring over Democrat voters? Is that what it boils down to?
I mean, it boils down to Glenn Youngkin winning Virginia by 50,000 votes and him running a school choice platform. And he still almost lost. Virginia, actually, the Republicans lost seats 2 years later in the next election. But they also had a governor that was running that was extremely unpopular and said just the most outrageous things in the world in front of cameras, leading up to that election. So that was really the big springboard for people to think that this is gonna help me become a bigger tent and get more people voting for me. Hey, I'm gonna be able to buy more votes by handing out government candy to more people. But it really hasn't worked out. I mean, it doesn't seem to be something that's really moving the needle in any direction at the moment. But what it is going to do is it's going to normalize independent voters who would not normally seek out welfare that are now going to be more open to voting for expanded welfare programs, because even conservative guys I know who benefited from some of these big government programs are like, yeah, maybe $1 million is wasted on this, but it helped me out. So even though it might not be a good program overall, since I was one of the few people benefited from it, I want to see more of it. So, I mean, you're just going to see like universal housing, universal basic income, universal health care. Like, if we have universal education, how are voters in 20 years not going to say, okay, now we need universal health care? Because if you have an education but you don't have your health, how can you do that? That's a human right. If you have education but you don't have a house, that's a human right. And so it's just setting us up for significant future losses in the future. And so even like, I'll tell the story in Arizona. So the Arizona, when that was passed, the state organization was pretty much just make sure independent homeschoolers are free. So they created this basically ESA homeschooler bucket and this.
And when you say the state organization was, are you talking about like the Homeschool Legal Defense Association?
Yeah, like the Arizona Homeschool Each state.
Okay. Yeah.
Homeschool organization, and they're pretty much hands off. Just keep, we want to be independent. Our people want to be independent, so make sure that we keep our independence. So when you start putting those hooks in those strings, that our people, don't get caught up in all of that. So I don't know if that.
Yeah, sink your hooks into the public school kids. Don't know, as long as you don't hook us, it's cool. Right.
That's right.
Well, they've changed their tune, and the big thing is there's documents going on in Arizona that the homeschool moms are passing around where you can have a cappuccino coffee curriculum, and you can buy a $1,000 or $1,200 cappuccino machine, do a 3-week curriculum around with your kids, and then the state will reimburse you for that cappuccino machine.
Baristas. Now we're making baristas now. So I didn't think they liked vocations. Hang on a second. Well, let me do this for a second. Let me take us to Tennessee specifically. And in the legislation we see right now, we see some very real issues. And I'd like to hear your comments on what you think. Is this what other people have done? Are they just repeating the same thing? Like right now, our governor has come out and said that any of the funding to a school, when a student is removed and he or by his family chooses to go to another school using a voucher, that school that the child is removed from would always continue to be funded at the same level. We also see that there are initiatives that don't come out of our education funding to pay for gyms, roads, bridges, infrastructure stuff for these small communities to build schools, or supposedly, and it's clearly a bribe in my book. We're seeing a lot of stuff thrown in here, and I don't want to give these guys too much credit as if they're geniuses. Is this what's being done everywhere?
Yes. So it depends on how unpopular school choice bills are. So the more things they're throwing in like that, must mean that it's extremely unpopular in some areas, because I mean, almost every public school in the states, typically they get funded based on students' participation. So that's why many of these states have started saying, oh, these homeschoolers can take 2 or 3 classes, because once they get on the rolls, they can get funding for you, even if you're not full time. And so they're trying to make it more palatable, again, to those legislators in those areas where they can vote yes for this bill, but the funding doesn't go away for their public schools. And so that's, again, so you're actually at that point, not only are you adding, I don't know the dollar amount, say $7,000 that the government now has to collect in taxes from somewhere else, but a lot of so like in Arizona, at least they made the argument, well, we were spending $10,000 per student, and if they leave the public school system, now we'll just spend $7,000. So that's a $3,000 savings.
Right.
Versus in Tennessee, it sounds like it's so unpopular that they're saying, not only are we going to continue to fund that school at $10,000, but we're going to give you $7,000. So that's a not a $3,000 savings from the state, but a $7,000 increase.
I think they've quit pretending that there will be any cost savings at all here. They're already admitting that there will be multiple testing requirements per year for anyone who takes this. So any school, let's say we have a private school here, we have several, like MUS, and one of the better boys schools here in our county of Shelby. They would have. They're never going to take the money, so it's a great one to use as an example. They're not going to need that. But they would then have to provide testing that they do not currently provide to the state. And our state is trying to say that you could make that data anonymous in some way. Well, here's the problem I have with that, and I think it goes to the heart of the issue. So let's say MUS starts doing these school TCAP testing or whatever it is for their placement testing, and they're getting this data on these students, and it's anonymous. Well, how are you actually proving that the students who are in the failing schools to start with have made any other progress in the place where you sent them to? So again, it goes back to that core focus. It's not making it better for the kids, is it? They're really just trying to hide it and cover it.
Yeah, I mean, the big behind the scenes, the purpose is to get rid of the teachers' unions, is what they're trying to do. But that doesn't really work when you're giving all the teachers in the teachers' union raises. And the reason that they want to get rid of the teachers' unions is because the teachers' unions donate 98% of their money to the Democrats. But that's not how the teachers vote. And so, I always say, well, what's that root cause of the problem? Well, maybe the teachers need to start voting for people that, have their best interest at heart, instead of these Marxists that are, really ruining their careers. I mean, look at it. I think the average teacher's tenure is like 3 years or something. Like, it's ridiculously low, or like 50% of teachers quit after 3 years. So they have these well-established unions that are clearly not doing their jobs, because I got to think that the typical union worker in Detroit, Michigan, probably doing the same job for 20 or 30 years, because the union is providing some sort of benefit to them.
Mm-hmm.
But clearly that's not happening, unfortunately, for our teachers. And so they're really trying to go about it the wrong way, and when you try to solve a problem the wrong way, you get really bad results.
I think that goes back to our aim small, miss small kind of things. And our target here has never been, they've never taken a shot. Do what? I think
that's too violent for the radio.
Well, I think what we've missed here is the target, which is, why do we educate? Why are we in this? Are we in this to run a government system, or are we in this to disciple and educate our children for the next generation, to make our nation greater, make our families better, make our churches stronger? And when we've lost those principles and our guiding lights, it all goes, there's no fixing just halfway. We really do have to come back to those basic principles of discipling our family and owning those principles ourselves, or else I just don't know how these half measures are ever going to get us there.
Yeah, they're not going to get us there. They're not even trying to get us there. I mean, the Byron Donalds, who's one of the Freedom Caucus down in Florida guys, his wife is one of the people paid to promote school choice, and they have a bunch of schools, so they're raking in millions of dollars themselves in Florida from their school choice. And I was at a conference with her, and she said, if a free market is when the government gives everyone the same amount of money and they can spend it wherever they want. I was like, that's the first time.
I was unaware the Soviet Union was so free.
She also said that a person who was starting schools was asking, how do I set up my economics for my schools, because they could pass these school choice bills, and then the next legislative session cut them all back, and then I have to fire all these teachers, and I've got mortgages I can't pay, and I have to bankrupt all these schools, etc. And she said, well, we just need so many people taking the money that it'll be impossible to roll back the program. And I was like, I had a friend there that was skeptical. Like, he wasn't for or against school choice at that moment. And he heard her say that, and he's like, I can't believe a Freedom Caucus wife is saying this at a conservative conference. And she also said that thank God for the people who are paying their own bills, because the state of Florida hadn't figured out how to pay any of their bills yet. And they would have had to lay off teachers and miss paychecks and stuff like that if they were completely reliant on the government cutting the checks that they owed.
All a lot of drinking at these homeschool contests, these homeschool conventions. I've got a wild places. What's going on, man?
A conservative think tank group.
Man,
that is the things that are coming out of so-called conservative think tanks. And I just point that out to say, yes, it is. They want it to be forever. It's going to be really expensive. And at the end, it's all about lining the providers' pockets. The student families are just pass-throughs, right? It's kind of like, Section 9 housing, right? Yeah, you get a roof over someone's head, but it's really the big businesses that invest and buy these things that are basically getting guaranteed rent on a monthly basis from the government. Those are the ones really making, millions and billions of dollars on an annual basis. And so when you say, hey, I want, to change income inequality, Well, guess what? It's the providers that are going to be coming out, flush with cash. Income inequality is going to go up, and inflation is going to go up with choice measures, because we're not going to do this at Classical Conversations. But I mean, it's not like it's rocket science. I hire a couple people to help Sean navigate and fill out the government paperwork. I add a sports team and get them some cool swag. And instead of them $700 a year, I charge them $7,000 a year. And instead of making $40 of profit on them at the end of the year, I make $740 of profit on them at the end of the year. And instead of flying in Coach or Spirit Airlines, I have my own multi-million-dollar jet I'm jet setting the Barbados in. So so financially, I'm an idiot for talking about this, but I also know on the other hand that my grandparents and my wife's grandparents both had to flee communist countries. Thank God that the United States was still a beacon of independence. And there's not really anywhere for my grandchildren to flee. And so I'm not willing to sacrifice, temporary financial gain for my children's future.
I tell you what, man, I looked at my wife the other day and I said, we have got to raise our children that they could flee to Mars. As we become, and she looked at me and it was the wildest thing. But you're right. There is nowhere to flee unless we make another place. And we've got to fight hard. Robert, what is the alternative? We're talking about what the government's doing in various states and how it seems like even in Tennessee and the committee hearings last year, as they were just getting to the preface of the discussion, a Democrat lawmaker from Memphis started asking, where is the accountability? In other words, how can the government sink its teeth into the home through this funding? Kind of conceding that the Democrats oppose this in Tennessee, we're going to lose, but how can we get more control in your home through this? But what is the alternative? What should we instead be pushing?
Yeah, actually, you have an article out on G3 website talking about some options, but really independence, educational independence and freedom. So we don't want government handouts and we don't want government oversight, and we've got to return. It starts in our churches and at the pulpit.
That's right.
What our church does is we have an education fund. So once a month, we collect money to pay for Christian educations for any families that need it. We have a 3-day-a-week university style school at our church that meets Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays. Obviously, that's subsidized by tithing and different things. They do their own fundraising. There is a 5-day-a-week classical school that started in our church as a 3-day university model school that got big enough to buy their own campus, and we still financially support them. And then once a week, they have a classical conversations community that comes in and uses the facility. And then I think the other day, they either let the facility rest or sometimes they have homeschool classes, like a homeschool co-op that comes in and uses it either in the morning or the afternoon.
Yeah.
And so churches and people come and go at our church, but I'm pretty sure there's exactly 0 students, and we have over 100 kids that are under the age of 18 at our church. I'm pretty sure 0 of them go to a public school.
Wow, great job.
So that
is a good job. I've
do exactly that.
There are a lot of pastors that are frightened. And frightened is the instance that I'm thinking about. Frightened would be the wrong word to use. Yeah. Well, no, in this case, I know a pastor, used to be my pastor, who before we moved, he homeschooled, and he encourages homeschooling. And he and his wife are the kind of people, they're going to meet with you and they're going to help you homeschool if you ask them for it. Is a couple people in the congregation that do not homeschool. And you look at many other things they're doing and they're living good Christian lives. And he's just flat out told me, I've been like, why aren't you more militant about homeschooling. And he said, well, I don't want to, we've got these longtime members. I don't want to drive them out.
Right.
What does it look like? How does a pastor push homeschooling? Did these efforts in your church, did they come from the pastors? Did they come from the elders? Were they ground up? I mean, I know you're probably at an elder-led church.
Yeah.
But where did they come from?
Yeah, we're at an elder-led church, and the pastor has a lot of say and sway, and is well respected. And I think it's just been over time. He's not militant about homeschooling your kids per se, because but he is militant about sending them to a Christian school, and saying, look, maybe there's obviously people that work in the public schools in ours, and that's kind of the people that they don't really want to offend. Yeah. But it's saying, hey, showing them the statistics. You have a 80% chance of your kids becoming apostate if you send your kids to the local government school, no matter how many days a week and how many hours you are sending your kids here to our church. And so that's just not, I would be not doing my duty as a pastor to let that type of statistic be out there, and you at least not be informed by it, and I think also saying, so I think just pushing those things. And look, we want all of our kids to be getting a Christian education. So these are the programs that we have. We have a program at our church. We have a partnership with a program at a standalone private school. We have partnerships with homeschool groups. If you don't like any of those, we'll give you a grant to send your kids to a Christian school of your choosing. So having those.
And is that where the high participation comes from? Because you guys aren't condemning. You're saying you're not just standing there pointing your finger saying you're failing your kids. You're standing there saying we love you and we want to help you educate your kids, because this is the realm of the family and the church in partnership. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, I think you're going to have more success long term if you're winning people with the right message, right? It's really you can scare people out of public school, CRT, all these things, and people can pull them. But if you're not casting a better version, I always think about it like there's mud pies, and Americans are used to eating mud pies. And then you come to them with an apple pie, and they're like, why would I want this? And they're like, well, it's an apple pie. Can you smell it? It smells delicious. Yeah, but I'm okay. I turned out all right eating mud pies. Isn't that good enough for my kids? And so so you have to win them to it. You have to say, well, let's just try it out. Or, hey, we'll help you along. And so I think you're going to have a lot more better long-term success. And you don't know, I mean, there are situations, right? You always say this is the best, but we live in a fallen world, right? And there's situations where, whether it's a court order, something bad just happened, and they have to do that, right? You don't want those people to be shamed. At the same time, you want them to understand that the role of the government is not to do these things. It's the role of the church. And so part of an article I just wrote too, also on the G3, is just like, Trump won, now what? Well, now Christians, we got to go start doing all the things we're supposed to have been doing. So all the things that we've said, oh, the government can do this and the government can do that, when they had no biblical realm of that, we have to start saying, no, we're going to do that. And so I think that starts with the elders and the church from the pulpit, is like, look, we don't want anyone in here. Hey, if we have a recession in 2025, I'm not predicting it, but they've been predicting recession for a long time. We're eventually going to get one. Are the elders, the people who do well at that church, and the pastor is going to say, hey, we do not want anyone in this church going on government programs. If you lose your job, we're going to set up a fund for that. If you need work, we're going to set up a fund for that. Are we going to step in as a church and do those things? Or are we going to say, oh, here's the phone number for the unemployment office. Give that a call. And so just as the church body, we have to start making these decisions. And I think it goes back to just saying, we need elders and we need groups of leaders who understand the three realms of government that God established. There's a family government, a church government and a civil government. And, I don't know the exact split, but the family government's getting about 60% of those. The church government's getting about 30%, and the state government's getting about 10%. You can argue what percents the church and family are getting, but I'm pretty sure the state government has no more than like 10%. And so as until we start preaching that from the pulpit, that this is not the realm of civil government, and we're going to figure out a way to step in and do it ourselves, we shouldn't be surprised when people worship the state and our pews are empty.
No, I mean, in a way, homeschooling is saying to Baal, and Moloch, we're not going to pass our children through the fire. And everybody thinks, and they look back and they read these extreme things from the Bible about Moloch and passing through the fire. They don't realize that was symbolic. It wasn't necessarily the immediate killing of those children. It was a process that you put these children through. You passed them through the fire. They got a little warm. They didn't die. They didn't even necessarily get burnt. But it was a pledge of allegiance from a very young age to the state as sovereign over God. The state was the representation of God in those Canaanite cultures. And, there's so many things we do today that are just little variations of passing our kids through the fire. Thank you for your efforts to provide an alternate system. Well, what we want to talk about now, Robert, is folks remember that Tennessee had a trigger bill. And that trigger bill was pertaining to abortion. And it said, okay, when the federal government, if Roe versus Wade is overturned, and the federal government loses its grasp on the sacred institution of abortion, because that's the highest holy right for a large section of the population, here's what's going to happen afterwards. And in Tennessee, what happened was it specifically said that our state law would revert to what it was before Roe versus Wade became the de facto. I won't acknowledge it as ever having been the law of the land, but the de facto, the so-called law of the land. We don't have anything in place like that in Tennessee. We don't have a trigger bill that says, the law reverts to what it was at this point in time, or let's make the law be this instead. The law was never this, but here's the trigger point. If this happens, the Department of Education is overturned. What is our ideal? And I want to ask you specifically, Robert, should we be looking, if the Department of Education is overturned, should we be looking to return control of education? It's required in the state constitution that the state provides an educational option for children. Should we be looking to return control of education primarily to the state level, or should we be looking to return it primarily to the county level, or should we be looking for something else?
Well, I think there's the Overton window practicality of it is, you're going to go to the state level at first, and, assuming, in my wildest dreams, the federal government stops collecting taxes that I was going to use to spend on that money. And therefore there are all the, different things that they fund would go unfunded. And so then the states are going to have to decide the level of funding that they want to provide for those things that the federal government now requires. And hopefully that's going to be significantly less, so the tax burden is less. From there, the next step is to, make sure that, I think, in a state where you have, constitutional requirement, and it's unlikely you're going to pass a constitutional amendment to change that, is how can you get the state Department of Education to be as small as possible, as far as oversight for public schools, and not necessarily the funding of them, and make them all controlled by your local school board. So at least then, Sean, you can walk down the street to the church next door where your local school board member goes and talk to them face to face about what's going on.
Yeah.
On a weekly basis, and try to transform it that way. Because, I can't speak to what's happening in Tennessee, but even in North Carolina, they've really stripped the school boards of significant parts of their power, and they have to basically, only buy curriculum from approved state vendors, and all the approved state vendors are woke. I'm sure they're all woke in Tennessee too, even though you have a conservative government. So we're still funding our enemies that way. And if you have, a state-led, local school board that wants to do something that's not woke, there's not really any approved vendors to do that. So right now you can elect a great school board and they're going to have their hands tied. And so I think you have to do is now push legislation to bring it down to the county and the school board level. And then maybe we can even then get abolitionist counties. I'd love to see that with abortion, and I haven't looked at it too deeply, but could we here in North Carolina, in Moore County where I live, get an abolitionist law? So that supersedes, the state. I think in North Carolina we have a 12-week minimum, maximum for abortion, which is better than a lot of states. Not as good as we need to, but could we do it from a county level? So ultimately, we need to have independent. I think from that point, you have a lot more options of how to fund things and making sure that money's not wasted, and accountability, because you have that face-to-face, in-person accountability versus with some faceless bureaucrat that you can't really do anything with. Right. So I think that's, as far as like a plausible time frame, I mean, that would be great. And there's a lot of states that, like, even in North Carolina, our Constitution just says that the legislator should encourage education. It actually doesn't say that they have to fund it, versus like Idaho says like they have to fund it, and they have to fund it adequately, whatever that means. I guess that means adding 10% every single year, no matter how much of a failure the last 10% was. So, I mean, I think ultimately it starts winning hearts and minds. It's the same thing with abortion. You can have the most radical abortion laws, but if no one wants to get one, then no one will. And how do you do that? You have to discipline the nation. How do you discipline the nation? Well, you have to preach it from the pulpit. And so let's not lose this cultural battle because our pastors are too cowardice to preach from the pulpit that sending your kids to Ball or Moloch for 12 years of education is not going to have a high success rate.
Yeah. Well, just so our listeners know what the Tennessee Constitution says, in Article 11, Section 12 of that says, the state of Tennessee recognizes the inherent value of education and encourages its support. The General Assembly shall provide for the maintenance, support, and eligibility standards of a system of free public schools. The General Assembly may establish and support such post-secondary educational institutions, including public institutions of higher learning, as it determines. So there is that we have to contend with. Robert, going back to what you mentioned earlier about the school board members and about how they're stripped of power. If you were a school board member, would you just spend a lot of your time once you were elected saying, hey, everybody, this is what I want to do. Do you support this? Because they won't let us do it.
Yeah, I mean, I think trying to be open and transparent, because you don't have that in government, is key. We have a local school board member. He's kind of, he's either well loved or disliked. He's kind of like a Trump guy, but he's just always continually exposing all the corruption and all the things, and just, laying it out in simple mathematic terms, like, hey, they told you it was going to cost $10 million to replace the gym roof. Well, I got a quote for $2 million, and we did it, save the taxpayers $8 million. Aren't you glad I'm on the board instead of the incompetent people that were on it before? And so there's just so much corruption, I would say, inherent in the system that, it would take 100 years to clean it up, if you even believe it's possible to clean it up, which I personally do not. But you could make it better, right? You can always make it better for those who are in the system. I mean, I think you just have to be radically transparent, and you have to understand that means every single person on both sides of the aisle are going to throw stones at you. And most people, I mean, they're not paid enough for that to happen, and so they just try to make it as good as they can, without, ruffling any feathers, because, that just makes it difficult. So, I mean, I think it'd be important for you all to say, hey, I don't want LGBTQ books in our library, but the state said we can only buy from this vendor, and this vendor only sells library packages that include these books. So if you want that changed, go call State Representative so-and-so at this number and tell them to, to do something different. So there's things you can do temporarily, but it ultimately, you would have to have the grassroots demanding from their, state house and state Senate representatives that we want control. We want our State Department of Education to have very limited rights over what's going on in education in our county, and get enough of those people elected to change the law so that the State Department of Education is mostly just, saying what's going on, maybe running some reports, giving out some information, and making sure whatever funding the state is collecting is getting distributed according to the law.
And I'll say this. I know that the fight for the school boards seems to be, or it has been in the last few years, very high profile. It's made a lot of headlines. But even here in Shelby County, we've seen that people who engaged in the fight are giving up and resigning and stepping out of it because it's just too nasty of a fight. It's too ugly, pulling their kids out of the system. This is not the way it's done. We need to raise up better leaders. We just did a show on this recently talking about what it takes to be a godly, God-fearing Christian politician and run for these offices. It's going to take a lot of churches that are standing up right now and telling their membership, go get involved and be ready to fight. And I'm not hearing that from a whole lot of politicians that, oh yeah, I came from a church that taught us how to fight this stuff the right way. It's just a rare man or rare community that has somebody who stood up and is godly.
Yeah, absolutely. Because you get up there and you're told you have to compromise. And if you want to be able to do this, you have to be willing to do that. And again, unless you're willing to, I'll just compromise for a short period of time, but then you get that callous over your heart. And so, very few legislators are willing to stand up there and fight and do it in an articulate way. God bless you all. I'm thinking about running, sometime in the future, but you talk to some of these people and they get in, for good reasons, but they're not necessarily have a comprehensive biblical worldview that has been formed by a church that, teaches the gospel. Something like, I think Barna says 6% of, Americans have a biblical worldview that used to be in the high teens, I think 20 or 30 years ago. And so again, that starts at the pulpit. We can't expect, our culture to embrace our Christian conservative ideas when we can't even articulate them properly from the group of people that have, quite frankly, been assigned to do that, in my opinion. So, I do think we are seeing more bold leadership. I am encouraged by, some of the people that Trump has put into office and is considering putting into his cabinet, people who are willing to fight, but you can just see how much they're just tearing those people down, finding every little thing, anything that could be anything, and trying to throw it against the wall to tarnish their reputations.
Yeah.
And so, most people, if you're getting paid $10,000 to do a job, to volunteer at your local school board, or, effectively a volunteer position, maybe getting a little bit of compensation because you want to make things better, but then the local newspaper that's, ran by some woke, editorial board is just, trashing you publicly day in and day out. Most people just don't find that that's worth the effort, and they don't have that community at their church that's going to back them up and is writing op-eds and, countering the narrative.
Yeah, you said something a little bit ago. You said that that this has got to start in the pulpits. I don't necessarily see that happening at this stage in our country, because of the quality that's in our pulpits by and large. I don't see the focus being on much outside of escapism. I hate to say it. I think it's going to start in our homeschools, and I think it's going to start in our private Christian schools. It's going to start with parents who are very involved in their children, in their children's lives, who teach their children.
that's bad for us to look at seminaries as not delivering the content we need when they were created to develop the higher institution for those pastors and pulpits. And it's
look at the PCA.
Right.
Look at the PCA
100%.
this past summer. If so many ruling elders had not shown up, they would have made some bad decisions. It's not the preaching pastors, it's not the teaching pastors that are pushing against cultural syncretism. Now, by the time the wordsmithing gets done, so many of these pastors, you think that they're third weighing their way out of things. It sounds sophisticated and it sounds plausible if you don't really take a deep dive into what they're saying and look at it. But Robert, I mean, you said when your parents and your grandparents moved here, they moved from countries that freedom was off the table, and America was their last best hope. There's the old saying that, I can forget who said it, but they talking about just the makeup of the states and the state legislatures and the spirit of individual freedom. They said, America's salvation will come from the West. I think that was said a lot during the 60s and 70s. Maybe there was a little bit of Barry Goldwater worship going on there, but no, if the Lord uses an institution to bring a temporal salvation to America, I would think it's going to be institutions. It's going to be the family educating its kids and taking responsibility. And I would say that is why Satan is using this educational movement right now. He's trying to tank homeschooling. He's trying to tank private Christian education. And that's what's going on. And man, I know I'm here to interview you, but sorry, man. I just had to rant.
Every single attack, the devil's always attacked children, whether it was, when Jesus was born, killing every baby under 2, when Moses was born, killing every single baby. When the Israelites were taken by Babylon, they took their best and brightest to be educated in the public schools of Babylon so that they would become Babylonians. He's always been attacking our kids because that's when they're the most easy to attack. They haven't been given wisdom, right? In the Old Testament, God basically laid out that, the priests didn't serve until they were 30. Well, why? So they could get some worldly wisdom, so that they could experience life, so that they could, get their frontal lobes developed a little bit more before starting to give advice and establish good character, and that they would be the type of people that can serve. And so, we have these patterns given to us, and then we just completely reject them when the government says they'll do something and they'll pay for it for us, and there's good people around it. So, I mean, I do think that absolutely it is an attack from the devil, that he's, typically these neoliberal rules would be coming from the left and the Democrat Party, but since they have sold out to the teachers unions, they can't really actively embrace these policies. But you do see, if a Democrat flips to a Republican after being elected, it typically has been over these school choice policies. But ultimately, it is to take control of the Christian schools. Now, I'm not saying your Republican legislator that goes to church and down the street from you is doing it to take over Christian education. He's just, a naive vessel for these larger groups to do. And I'm not even saying that there's not, these are people who have been worked so hard and have been blinded so much. They aren't necessarily Christians. They don't have this worldview, and they're just pushing it and pushing it and pushing it. And you could show them every single statistic in the book that shows that this is only going to expand government and reduce quality of education, and ultimately just normalize, welfare for everyone in some form or matter.
Yeah.
And this is not going to turn out elections. And look, the pagans aren't having kids right now. They've got this 4D movement now because Trump's been elected or whatever. And you've got these people saying, I'm not going to have sex with men until we're married because of, abortion being, not unlimited or free anymore, or whatever they're saying. It's like, okay, look, Christians, have children, be fruitful and multiply, discipline them in the admonition and love of the Lord, preach it from the pulpit. Make sure if you're a pastor, right, you are a shepherd. You are shepherding your flock. Your most naive, innocent group in that flock is your children. Do you want to stand in front of the bema seat and tell God that you did not preach giving these kids a Christian education because you were afraid of the teachers' unions, because you were afraid that the principal that is on your board is going to push back? Is that the conversation? Look, I'm going to have some very uncomfortable conversations on the bema seat. But God said that it would be better for you to have a millstone tied to your neck than to cause one of these little kids to stumble. And if you are a preacher and you are not encouraging and figuring out ways to encourage your families to give your kids a Christian education, pray on it. Does your conscience tell you that you are doing all you can, or should you be a little bit more worried than you are right now? Yeah. That you should be having a millstone tied to your neck and being thrown overboard? Because I would think if pastors who have never heard it put this way, or elders who have never heard it put this way, think and pray and look in the Bible to their guide and not to the fear of man, that they would come to some new conclusions that they haven't come to before.
Yeah. Well, what does that look like practically? And so I've been very reluctant in my own church to talk. I don't want any money from my church to educate my kids.
Sure.
Right? We're doing it. We're doing it. We're going to continue to do it. But I do look at I would love the church to be able to. And just to be totally transparent, I've talked to my wife about how cool it would be to like educationally adopt kids, down the street from us, who like, man, that kid is so smart. Where are their parents sending them? Oh man, wouldn't it be great if we could just like take over and like educate them ourselves?
That's illegal
in a way that's really weird.
Like in North Carolina, in the last legislative, they've actually now make it so you're allowed to homeschool, I think, up to 2 other kids in your family.
Awesome.
Really?
That's a school choice thing I can support.
Yeah.
If you're a parent and you're homeschooling your kid, as long as, homeschool as many as you can fit in your house. Like the government doesn't need to pay for it.
Amen.
Make that a rule. Like there's red tape. Let's make it easier to start church schools or Christian schools.
Micro school for the win. I love it.
I wish the people in the audience could see the single tear going down my cheek right now. It's I feel affirmed and validated, and that's just thank you, Robert. That's So I mean that would be school choice that and I wouldn't make the government pay for that. I mean that's families getting together, and that's the other thing. If you talk to people in the states where there's school funding, or this so-called school choice exists, Robert, and like the ladies offering cello lessons or piano lessons or whatever skill they're offering, that they used to get paid in like eggs or babysitting or, some things that actually were tangible and didn't inflate, now it's just a monetary transaction. So these families, instead of like embracing each other and coming along and having the sense of cooperation and community, it's like, well, write my check and then get out of my house.
Yeah. Well, and I'm glad you brought that up, because this is definitely a story I want to share. So we have a friend named Rachel in Arizona. She's a leader. I don't think I shared this last time, but when Arizona did school choice, one of her friends was so excited, and she's like, Rachel, she was trying to convince her that this school choice bill was good, and said, Rachel, don't you remember? I used to have to work part-time in order to be able to afford to homeschool our kids. And so when I did that, my aunt had to come over and watch my kids so I could go to work. Now I don't have to do this because, in Arizona, they get $7,000 per kid. So, I'm getting $21,000 a year now and no longer have to work, and I can offer them all these things. And Rachel kindly and lovingly looked at her and said, I just want to make sure that we're clear. You used to rely on hard work and your family, and now you rely on the government.
Yeah.
And that mom, understood the decision she made, and I don't believe she made that same decision again the next year. But I think that's what our churches have done, with social welfare, with unemployment, with all of these things, is instead of being imagine if you had to go to church to be able to get these sorts of things. Our churches would be full, right? They would hear the gospel preached because they would see that the church is a net benefit to their lives. But now, we've just given so many things to the civil government that God never thought the civil government did not design the civil government to do, and becomes expensive. It becomes corrupting, and it doesn't work out. And so we've got to stop. We cannot let it overtake our Christian education. This has to be our final stand, because, in 40 years, we could have bold Christian leadership everywhere, because that's the only people that are left alive, because we're the only ones who had kids and we raised them inside a Christian education. But as long as Christians are the only ones having kids, but we're sending them to the pagans to be educated, we'll continue to get these results of bloated government, corruption, income inequality going sky high, inflation sky high, and all the things that an immoral government and immoral worldview place on a people.
Yeah. Well, and you talked about the fertility rate. So this is an example. Gary North used to always talk about the economics of the pagan versus the economics of the Christian. And he said, pagan economics experience just tremendous rapid growth, but it's unsustainable. It's based on wickedness, and it rapidly collapses. Whereas Christian economics, experience the faithfulness of the widow with her 2 mites that grows just a little bit, but it is rock solid, and it is stable. And going back to what you said about Christians and childbearing, South Korea has a current total fertility rate of 0.81. And we don't talk enough about what that means. What that means is that for every 100 South Korean great-grandparent, there will only be 6.6 great-grandkids. So like the article I'm looking at on Palladium Mag says that the 0.07 fertility rate predicted in South Korea by 2024, that amounts to 4.3 great-grandkids. And they phrase it, it's as if we knew a disease would kill 94% of South Koreans in the next century. So combined homeschooling, you have just blown my mind by telling me that North Carolina lets me homeschool my neighbor's kids. This is the greatest evangelical tool that I've heard of. Sean and I were getting ready to start Christian schools all over the state of Tennessee, and you're telling me I can do it in my kitchen.
Well, I don't know what your Tennessee laws are, but you can determine whether you want to follow them or not.
There we go.
I really believe in the lesser magistrate doctrine. So
yes, interposition.
So we are great proponents of Pastor Terrell, and had him on the show several times, because we do believe that there is a responsibility at the local level for us to step in and protect the innocents. And we think this is one of those issues that is crucial for us. We have to step in this moment. We have to talk about educating the least of us in our community, because we're failing at it. And it's time for us to rise up as a community from the pulpit, from the families, and do what it is. If it's small micro schools, if it's just turning our churches into discipleship academies, whatever it is, we ain't doing it right, and we got to fix something.
When you think about the cycle of poverty, right? You get these single, you get people married or out of wedlock, or have a kid, then get divorced, and there's not that economic stability for them. And then the parents, even the best ones, they're working 3 jobs a week. And they're never at home, and so the state raises these kids. And so but if you have if you're able to step in and help with the homeschooling, or if the church is providing funds to give them a Christian education, you can start putting these mentorship in places. You can help stop some of these cycles of poverty from continuing. But if you outsource it to the government, it's not just going to continue, it's going to accelerate. And so we've seen that acceleration, and that's when you get 6 grandchildren for every grandparent, because there's that hopelessness there, because there's no sense of community, there's no one else, there's no neighborly love. We're not being good neighbors to each other. We're saying, hey, if you have a problem, go to the state to get it fixed. And the state's a faceless bureaucrat, and if they're not if God hasn't given them that ability to actually fix the issue, then they're going to be struggling. And that's what you see, like the foster care system, I think, the average employee tenure in the foster care system is like 18 months or something. So it's like, I mean, like even the people that go in with a good heart, I want to help all these foster kids. They only last like a year and a half because the system just destroys them. And then you've got, different states that are saying, hey, if you're a Christian, you can't foster kids because we don't want your, radical ideologies being thrown upon them. So, the church has to step up. I mean, people want some, that's the other problem with school choice is they think the government just can throw some money at a problem and it's going to fix it. The problem is us, right? It's us at the church. We got to do the hard work, but that hard work's rewarding and offers eternal blessing. So, ultimately the answer is the church. And so whether it's, and I think some of that, you asked earlier about our pastor. I mean, some of it was and has been those early homeschoolers and people that are sending their kids to Christian education, kind of putting some pressure on them to do some things. I mean, like obviously my family doesn't need those resources to help us homeschool, but when the plate gets passed around for Christian education, we're writing a good check because we want those people in our family that are in our extended family and our church family to be able to have those same blessings that we have. And so, we support our local classical Christian school. If there's a fundraiser, there's going to be a Bortins there, even though we don't sell our curriculum to them. In some ways, they're competitors to us because people bounce, to them sometimes and to us other times. And why would you let your competitors? Like, well, I don't think there's any competition. The competition is Christian education, private Christian education, and state-funded education. Because
and my kids are going to be dating and potentially marrying those kids from these other institutions. And as far as I'm concerned, none of the community needs to be allowed to slip. We need to be focusing on making it all more Christian and more Christ-like. And it's all important to me. Yes, I hope that CC is the vehicle that everybody picks. I love it. I love to advocate for it because I think it's a quality program. But I am not a bit offended when someone else tells me that they're using a different program that's Christian-based, and I think that it's creating good kids in my church because that's exactly what I need to happen in my community. I need them discipled well so that they can affect the community in the way that we know needs to happen.
And, a lot of times you hear people like in churches saying, well, it's not my kid. It's like, well, you look at the statistics. If it's not your kid, praise God. But it's his two best friends. And how much influence are they going to have if they're spending 8 hours a day with them and you're seeing them at dinner time and, a few hours on the weekends?
It is not their kid, but I mean, these are the people that they're going to have to govern society with, that they're going to have to navigate society with. These are the people that, if it's falling down that's not your kid track, if they end up in government schools, these are the people that are going to be educating your grandkids or your kids. So yeah, in a world where everybody wants to do short-term missions trips that cost a ridiculous amount per pop, this is a very practical way to love your neighbor comparatively. I would say investing in Christian education is better than short-term missions. Sorry, short-term missions pastors.
Long-term.
I'm sure though
are always better than short-term missions, right? I mean, you've got to get the long-term things right. The short-term can boost it, but I mean, like think about that. Like, typically I'll get a handful of letters a year going on short-term missions. I usually support them, and it's usually like $1,000, maybe $1,500. It depends where they're going. Maybe $500 to $1,500. Let's just say it's $1,000. Well, that's for our elementary school program. Our elementary school program for an entire year is less than $1,000, and for our high school program, just rounded up, is about $2,000 So for the price of a short-term missions trip, which I went on a number of those growing up and great experiences, but you can have for $2,000 a year have a much greater impact. And we failed at missions locally, right? We wouldn't have 6% of the U.S. having a biblical worldview and 80% of kids walking away from the church once they turn 20 if we were winning the local missions. And so you can only have successful short-term outreach if you're filled up, right? You can only give what you have. And we created a desert inside of our own churches and expect us to be able to go somewhere else. I mean, we're probably about 10 years away from Kenyans sending missionaries to the U.S. to help us get on the straight and narrow again. So
you're not lying. You're not joking. Well, so for our listeners, they hear this, and if I was Sally Jones, I'd be telling them for $3 a day, you can support a child developing a biblical worldview here in the United States that can make this country stronger, that can make our churches more Christ-like, that can have an evangelical heart that's capable of reaching out to their neighbors, that's capable of ministering to this nation and proclaiming the name of Christ throughout this land and as a result throughout the world. Robert, tell us about those resources that they could plug into for that price. What does Classical Conversations have available? Because you guys are a good curriculum. Sean likes you, and I like you too.
Well, thanks. So, I mean, I could tell you selfishly, what you can do for Classical Conversations. I mean, there's two avenues. One, we've set up a partnership with Give, Send, Go. And you can go to Give, Send, Go, type in Classical Conversations, and they have set up a fund where they administrate it, but you can donate to them. And then, parents who are in, financial needs or low income can apply for grants, and they'll administer grants for that. You can also go to classicalconversationsfoundation.org. We have our own 501c3 that we give to different things, and we actually collect money there and give some of that, or we'll be giving some of that to the Give, Send, Go, because we want to have an arm's length transaction there. HSLDA has the Compassion Fund. They distribute well over $1 million, maybe close to $2 million a year to low income, to people who lost a husband or a wife, so that they can continue to homeschool. So those are three different organizations in the homeschool sphere that anyone with a web browser and a credit card can go donate to right now and support Christian education in the United States. I can't vouch for every single private school out there, but every single Christian private school probably has a way for you to donate to them, whether they have a speaker that you can go listen to or a fundraising dinner. If you're a person of means and you're looking for places to donate to change the world, I can't think of a better place than to call up that local Christian private school and find out, can you help offer scholarships for low income families or for widows, or is there something that they need that you can purchase for them on their behalf? And then, like I said, I mean, every single Christian parent, whether you need the money or not, should be pressing on your elders or whoever's in charge of your church to start education funds. If there's a greater, long-lasting, mission that your church can have, I can't think of it. If the whole entire purpose of preaching from the pulpit is to educate, and so supporting Christian education is like the primary thing your church should be doing outside of Sunday morning preaching. And of course, you got youth groups and different things, but if God gave you a building for 7 days a week and you're only using it for 5 or 6 days, or only using it for 3 or 4 days, God's going to ask you, why did you let my building sit open? When you go to the seat, why I gave you this resource and you hid it, right? That was not a good day for that parable. The guy who said, you're a cruel master, reaping what you don't reap, sowing what you don't, those things. And so he said, you didn't even put it in a bank, so at least I can get some interest. I think that's another thing. So all those things are simple. Whether it's donating to something that already exists, or talking to your leadership, or if you are a leader listening to this, the next time you guys have a board meeting, or get it on the agenda. What are we doing at our church to support Christian education? Look, you don't even have to have a kid. You could be an old church where your youngest member is 70 and there's 10 of you that go to church on a Sunday morning. There are things that you all can do so that your legacy lasts longer than this flesh will last. So,
amen.
And now we get to see if we can educate our heathen neighbors' kids.
Oh no.
That's
well, Robert, I want to thank you for this time. I appreciate you coming in to speak with us on this topic and to just open your soul with us on how this issue is affecting America and specifically to Tennessee. I thank you for all you guys have done, and I appreciate the work that you've done in Classical Conversations.
Yeah. God bless y'all. God bless y'all.
Well, thank you all for everything you're doing. Like, I'm only one person in one spot. I don't have that New Testament ability to just show up somewhere else as I'm walking. So we need, we need you all and more people on the ground talking about these dangers because, I can talk about it as much as I want, but if it's not compelling, if you look, this is what I tell people. I am very, very would love for someone to just convince me that I'm wrong because I can make way more money than I do now. And so I really do think that this is a moral issue. And so for Christians, if anyone can find any Bible verse that would indicate that this is an acceptable way to pay for Christian education, please, please, please find me on X, Facebook, Instagram, shoot me an email. I am, that would be my golden nugget. That would be my ticket to private airplanes and drivers and, sports tickets and look, instead of being shunned at these conservative events I go to, I can be celebrated and get invited to all the cool parties that I don't get invited to because I'm against school choice. The mean looks I get from people I agree with 90% of the time because I have to discipline them with the Lord. So I'm very open to someone telling me I'm wrong and giving me the proof. But so far, look, it's worth $100 million a year to me. So please, it's actually worth $700 million a year to me. So please, someone tell me, show me where I'm wrong. And don't give me Egypt because I got to write a blog post on how ill-informed people are when they say, well, Egypt.
Are you talking about where the Israelites walked out and the Egyptians had to give them goods? Is that what you're trying to?
Oh, the whole Egypt story, man. Yeah. The robbing Egypt story on the back end and on the front end when they collected all the grain and then sold it during the bad years. It's like, whenever they tell me people like one, Egypt was more like a big business like Microsoft or Apple because it wasn't like a constitutional country. 2, they sold the grain. And 3, the Israelites became enslaved for taking the grain and staying in Egypt.
Yeah. There are churches in Florida on the way out. There are churches in Florida that are telling their congregants that it's prepare for 7 years of good so they're actually private Christian schools in Florida that are somehow taking this $7,000 a year they get in Florida and they're viewing it that they're laying it aside for the 7 years of famine that are upcoming. So I've heard that.
Yep. And then the taking of Egypt. Oh, we took their wealth on the way out. I was like, keyword on the way out.
Yeah. Yeah.
And guess what happened still in the desert that they wandered in for 80 years? Can't we go back to Egypt? Can't we go back?
That's right.
Yeah.
And all this is school choice is parents asking, can we go back to Egypt where they fed us and they clothed us? And at least we knew. I mean, that's what school choice really is God, your father, the one who's going to provide for you because he's got cattle on 10,000 hills and wishes no evil to be done to his children. Or is Caesar, is Rome your God? And is that who you want to sustain you? Is that who you want to feed you, put your roof over your head? And I think that's the ultimate question everyone has to ask themselves. And as legislators, sometimes I hear legislators say, well, I would never take the money, but I want it to be an option for others. And I'm just like, that sounds
like a drug dealer. That's like a drug dealer. I don't use my own product.
Exactly. So I would just really encourage everyone. It's worth a fight. It's if we lose this fight, I don't know what the next option is. So I don't know if we have to go colonize some other country or what, but I don't know that if we have universal school that's gonna survive.
We'll have to make a church school at Rod Martin's plant on Mars. Rod Martin is planning the first Baptist church on Mars, I guess. So he's I've
joked about it, but if anybody has connections, I probably have connections with Elon Musk now. I'd love for Classical Conversations to be the official curriculum of Mars. Right? The first people are going to have to homeschool.
Yeah, I like that. Well, thank you so much for coming on. Again, folks, you could donate to the Classical Conversations fund. They have a long-term asset management fund to support their group. What was that again, Robert?
Yeah. So the easiest one to go to is classicalconversationsfoundation.org, or you can go to Give, Send, Go and type in Classical Conversations, and they have a fund you can give to there.
Yeah. Well, it's been a great episode. Actually, we hope to get several episodes out of this. Thank you for appearing on the show. And remember that no matter what the government does, we have a promise from the book of Exodus, the 15th chapter, verse 18, that just simply says, "The Lord shall reign forever and ever."